ABC TV's season of golf begins with a live telecast of the National Panasonic New South Wales Open Championship from Manly Golf Course, this Saturday at 1 o'clock. Some of Australia's and the world's leading golfers will be taking part in this championship event, including defending champion Bill Rogers. ABC TV viewers will have expert comments from around the course with Gordon Bray, Brian Trafter, Graham Dawson, Peter Thompson and Graham Marsh, this Saturday and Sunday on ABC Television.
Good evening, Judith Barr with the headline news. More than 200 charges are to be laid against Mr Norm Gallagher, at least 9 other people and a number of companies. The charges follow an examination of the Winnicky report, which was tabled in the Victorian Parliament earlier this year. Legislation to establish a National Crimes Commission has been introduced in federal Parliament. However, the federal government has yet to win the cooperation of the states. An unemployed man, aged 23, appeared in the Adelaide Magistrates Court today on 5 counts which include murder, attempted murder, abduction and causing grievous bodily harm. And tomorrow's weather will be cool with a shower or two. Adelaide can expect an overnight low of 10 degrees and a high tomorrow of 17. Well, that's all the news for the moment. The late bulletin will be from Melbourne during a break in the Mazda tennis tournament.
The internationally acclaimed Adelaide production of Filthy Children returns to ABC Television.
Touch of your lips.
Great big pimples all over my head.
Hey, Doc! Wipe that smile off your face, son.
Filthy Children on ABC Television, Saturday at 6.
Now South Australia has 20% of the national total of investment projects.
Good evening and welcome to Nationwide. Well, the Liberal government's confident claims about the level of investment in South Australia have produced the only note of controversy in an otherwise very dull election campaign. The opposition disputes those figures, and later in the program we'll examine just how valid they are. Well, 6 days into the election campaign, the incumbents and the aspiring politicians are out on the road, indulging in the usual round of baby kissing and handshaking. But apart from that personal effort, the parties have mounted very expensive campaigns to convince you, dear voter, that what you see is what you get. Patrick O'Neill.
For a week, they've been churning it out. 3.5 tons of paper, 65 kilograms of ink. If the Liberal Party's electoral pamphlets were laid out on the ground side by side flat, they'd cover over 6 square kilometres. Soon these cards will be appearing in your letterboxes. And not a sign of Mr Tonkin's face. There are achievements claimed, policies determined, candidates extolled, but no Mr Tonkin. By contrast, John Bannon's face is very prominent on Labour's literature. And the Labour presses are churning it out too. One must assume similar tonnages, similar quantities of paper. And policies, candidates' achievements are also extolled. All will eventually end up as political litter. This election has come as a godsend to the printing industry. Retrenchments will be staved off. The printers will hang on to print another day, possibly for a federal election.
I've got you all along here today to announce the details of our campaign plan over the next 3 weeks. I think Mr Tonkin's been forced into an election perhaps earlier than he wanted. But,
First cab off the rank was Labour. Last Friday, they held a special media campaign launch, and up front was the man with the smiling face.
What I want to show you today is our establishment commercial. That is our first television presentation, which we're going to start running from Saturday night and will run through into much of the following week.
A few years ago, under a Labour government, South Australia was showing Australia how to do it. Today, We're showing Australia how not to do it.
And first mistake was Labour's. By the time you've worked out that Bannon didn't actually claim that Labour was lagging behind, you've missed much of the message. So, on with the show.
In the battle to lower interest rates and tax, we want South Australia to win. In the battle
Labour's jingle may not be the stuff of which hits are made, but the message is clear. Elect a Bannon government.
you want our economy in better shape. It's time we started with a fresh, clean slate. Get John Bannon to lead the state. If you want South Australia, if you want South Australia to win.
Oh, and we can't have the leader of the opposition forgetting his lines.
Now, this passage on the radio ads is where, in fact, my voiceover is giving the message, the more substantive message, with the theme sort of running in the background.
And afterwards Bannon talked, and talked, and talked, and talked, while his wife seemed somewhat overwhelmed by the occasion.
Good afternoon, the Liberal Party.
The Liberal Party never actually had an official campaign launch, but they allowed us to film inside their headquarters. And they allowed us to film their material as soon as the Premier had given his policy speech.
Your choice will not just elect a state government for the next 3 years. It will determine in a very real way the kind of community that you want, the sort of opportunities available to you and your children for the rest of this decade and beyond.
And at last we saw the Premier's face, looking a little older than it did 3 years ago. But it's still not in the literature. And it's not in the TV ads either.
During the long years of Labour, investment in South Australia dwindled to a pathetic 2%.
And this week's possible mistake is the government's.
The Liberals promised to turn around that humiliating figure. They have. Now South Australia has 20% of the national total of investment projects.
These figures are disputed. They've been accused of misleading the public. Lies, damn lies and statistics. Now we're even more confused. And one gets the distinct impression that although the Liberal Party allowed us to see their material, it was with a tiny bit of reluctance.
We would hope to indicate that unless the development of the state is on the right channels, then other opportunities and other developments cannot proceed.
I notice that one face that's conspicuous by its absence is the Premier's face on any of your advertisements, and I understand your commercials as well at this stage. Is this because you think the Premier's a liability or what?
No, it's got nothing to do with it at all. What we want to do is present the stark realities of the situation. We believe it, in this particular occasion, policies and developments of that nature are more important than basic personalities.
Yes, the ALP is very much flogging John Bannon. His face is up front in absolutely everything, and yet not only does the Premier not appear, but ministers seem to be in the background as well.
Well, I think you'd know that these sort of things are always a mix. And there are other ways of getting the Premier and his ministers before the public.
Like the opening of airports, hotels, pipelines, the making of other announcements and re-announcements. The government of the day always has an advantage. But electioneering is still an expensive business. The cost of television advertising is quite phenomenal. Just to show a commercial like this, it would cost about $600 to $800 in prime time. Now, the Liberal Party is expecting to spend half its total advertising budget just on showing television commercials. Now, assuming the Labour Party does the same thing, that means the commercial television stations in Adelaide are going to reap in excess of $250,000 just during this election campaign. And it costs $4,000 just to take out a full-page spread like this in the Advertiser. So, where does the money come from? The business houses are the traditional source of Liberal Party finance. We gather that the party is far from broke. We gather also that the Liberal Party is planning to spend about $350,000 to $400,000 on its campaign. But there'll probably be ample money to spare. But the business houses haven't just given generously to the Liberals this time. How much is this campaign costing you?
Well, it's something in excess of $100,000. It's a lot of money. Political campaigning is expensive today, and I believe too expensive.
Well, where's it all coming from?
Well, we raise the funds ourselves. There's, the much despised chicken raffles, fates, and lotteries that are run by the party organisation. Contribute a lot of money.
Any business donations?
Yes, we get some support from business.
Can you say where they come from?
There are a number of businesses that believe that if they're giving to one side of the political fence, they ought to match that on the other. 2 bob each way. Yes, although I expect on the odds we get somewhat less than the Liberal Party. But nonetheless, I think in our political system it's very necessary.
Gentlemen, thanks very much for coming. I wanted to let you know today before we had our opening what exactly has been done. I know you've been briefed many times in the past, but I thought I'd show you something of what has been done.
A new feature of the city campaign will be the National Country Party. They're putting up 3 candidates in city electorates this time. Their campaign budget, $50,000.
And you'll notice that we're working twice as hard to make us twice the state. That's our slogan, and we'll be unveiling that this afternoon. Oh, don't forget,
and more important, they'll be featuring a television ad for the first time in the city.
If you're tired of voting Liberal and Labour's not for you, there's another smarter way to let your feelings through. The National Country Party means integrity and strength. We'll give you a bigger say. It's just
and it's the catchiest ad of them all.
And if you love South Australia, vote for a party that does too. The National Country Party will work twice as hard for you.
Also in the race are the Australian Democrats, and they've got a problem.
Main problem, as usual, is money.
Or the lack of it.
The lack of money, that's right.
Well, how much money are you hoping to raise then?
We've estimated that just a very basic campaign will cost us $30,000.
The Australian Democrats are always broke. We can't expect any advertising by them on television. But of course there are other ways of getting publicity. The much talked about split in the Democrats did achieve one thing. It got their party's name recognised right at the start of the campaign. So, which way is the press playing it? Investment pledge, the Liberals. Enterprise fund, the answer, Labour. And Azaria on the front page. Stony Point booth sought by Tonkin, 7 million housing lift by Labour, and still Azaria on the front page. Uranium, what Labour says, uranium, what the Liberals say, and still no state election on the front page. Well, that was Mondays, Tuesdays and Wednesdays Adelaide news. Now, if this sort of thing keeps up, the government obviously cannot expect to get any support from the Murdoch press. Of course, the editorials always tend to favour the government slightly, but pretty mildly so. Let me just read to you from Friday's news, the day after the election was called. And I quote from the editorial, "Both Premier and Opposition Leader are decent men, genuinely concerned for the welfare of South Australia. It's a pity that only one of these two honourable men can win." So it would appear that Labour cannot indulge in martyrdom either.
Under the long years of Labour,
hardly a gripping start to the campaign. Both sides are playing it in a very gentlemanly way. No gimmicks, no hyperbole, no intrigue, no scandal.
Since the Liberal government came to power, bankruptcies
And there are 2 more weeks of it to go. Of course, there are still commercials to come. Labour's still got to present its policy speech, but we already know their policies, and we know the government's.
If you're tired of voting Liberal and Labour's not for you,
one just hopes that the electorate won't get so bored that come polling day they'll forget to vote altogether.
Patrick O'Neill reporting. Well, in that report, Patrick referred to the advertisement about South Australia's share of the Australian investment dollar. We saw a portion of it at the opening of the program. Well, the claims made in that ad are now in dispute, not surprisingly by the opposition. But as Simon Nash reports, they aren't the only people casting doubt on the validity of the Liberal claims.
Truth, it seems, isn't only the first casualty of war. Politics gives the facts a pretty decent battering too. It seems any snappy advertising agency can turn around these statistics to prove just about whatever they want to. And the credibility of those statistics is rapidly becoming one of the few issues of this otherwise lacklustre election campaign. Now, given the Labor Party is yet to launch its campaign policy proper, we've so far only had the chance to examine the government's claims. And already they're creating fireworks. First to be hotly disputed is the Premier's claim, that supported by his television ads, that South Australia now enjoys a huge chunk of the national investment dollar. In fact, Mr Tonkin has said a fifth of Australian investment is spent in this state. Now, those figures were based on this federal government report. It was prepared by the Federal Department of Industry and Commerce. Now, the report itself has been criticised for its accuracy. Among its detractors have been none other than the venerable head of the Treasury in Canberra, Mr John Stone. But notwithstanding this, there does seem to be some problems with the Liberal Party ads, which claim South Australia's getting 20% of the nation's investment dollar. The report, in fact, says that manufacturing industry is indeed getting that much, 19.5% it says. But when all our industries are lumped together, the figure is very much smaller, about 12.5%. And for its part, the Labor Party released last night a set of its own figures, apparently leaked from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And they say the actual level of investment in South Australia is about half of the government's claims. Confused? Well, who can blame you? I certainly am. So today I took the various claims along to an independent expert to get him to come to an opinion, Mr Graham Scott, Senior Lecturer in Economics at Flinders University. But before we talk to Mr Scott, let's have just another quick look at that controversial Liberal Party ad.
During the long years of Labor, investment in South Australia dwindled to a pathetic 2% of the national total. The Liberals promised to turn around that humiliating figure. They have. Now South Australia has 20% of the national total of investment projects. It just shows how...
Well, Graham Scott, the opposition leader, Mr Bannon, yesterday said those figures were as close to a lie as possible without actually calling them a lie. What's your feeling after looking at the prospective cases today?
Well, I think the crucial word in the figures that the Liberal Party quotes are projects. And these are figures that are reported in respect of investments that are intended or are being contemplated by businesses in South Australia at the present time. And they'll only be undertaken, if undertaken at all, over upwards of 6 or 8 years.
So you're saying the Liberal government is counting promises, not actual committed projects?
That's right, yes. And the other point is that the figure they're quoting is for manufacturing projects rather than for total investment, where the South Australian proportion of the Australian total is only 12%.
So, and at the very best, that figure should actually be saying 12%, not close to 20%.
Unless they were going to use the word manufacturing project.
Which they didn't, of course.
Exactly.
What's your feeling comparing the various statistics that were offered by the Labor Party and the Liberal Party? Do you think we can put some faith in one more than the other?
Well, the figures that the Labor Party are quoting refer to investment that has actually been undertaken. And we all know that...
So that's actual dollars spent?
That's right. And we all know the South Australian economy has been extremely depressed, with employment going backwards. And it's not surprising that investment has been depressed relative to the rest of Australia as well. So the figures that they're quoting are rather, the Labor Party are quoting, are rather gloomy. But equally, the figures that the Liberal Party are quoting do suggest that investment in South Australia is going to increase. Whether or not it'll ever get to 19.5% of the Australian total, I'm very, very doubtful, simply because it is dominated by the Stony Point project. And once that passes through the pipeline, then the South Australian figure may very well fall quite substantially.
Would you think it would be too strong to suggest that that sort of advertisement was being misleading?
I think it's misleading, yes.
Could you elaborate just a little bit?
Well, I think in two respects, that it doesn't say that it refers to manufacturing projects. It also doesn't say that, or doesn't emphasise sufficiently to my mind that there are many, many slips between the cup and the lip in this case, and that, as we've all seen, investment projects have been falling by the wayside very, very substantially in the last 18 months.
So you would suggest that anybody watching that advertisement should be very wary of those sorts of figures?
Well, perhaps not any more than any other advertisement.
You mean politicians are apt to stretch the truth a little?
I didn't mean any political advertisements necessarily.
But advertisements in general, they should treat it with the same sort of... Scepticism. Graham, thanks for joining us.
Simon Nash talking with economist Graham Scott. Well, just a short while ago we learned that tomorrow the Australian Labor Party will consider whether they'll take action against the Liberal advertisement under the Australian Broadcasting Tribunal's misleading advertising provisions. Well, when big companies like Qantas, the nation's flag carrier, and BHP, the nation's steel monopoly, start shedding labour, and lots of it, then Australians know they're part of the world recession, or depression, as some are beginning to call it. Today, Qantas's workforce of 12,500 people were reflecting on yesterday's grim news that the international airline wants 1,000 voluntary retrenchments starting next month. Qantas management have said they hope the retrenchments will be voluntary, but they'll sack people if necessary. The retrenchments have been forced on the airline, so management says, by the most serious financial recession in world aviation history. Well, who will step forward to offer up their jobs? Will there be a rush of volunteers, or will Qantas be forced to make the decisions for their workers? Today, Paul Murphy talked to members of the workforce to gauge their collective mood.
The Qantas jet base at Sydney International Airport is the nerve centre of our national flag carrier. This is where catering, maintenance, training, cargo and flight operations all happen. The value of buildings, plant and equipment here has been put at $700 million. And these are just some of the 12,500 Qantas employees who make the whole thing work. Perhaps some of these people will offer up their jobs as the company is asking. Perhaps they might be sacked compulsorily if the voluntary plan fails. But when I talked to a representative cross-section of Qantas workers today, from cooks to clerks to engineers, the mood couldn't have been more pessimistic.
Young man, just married and got 17 years in with the company and got the future ahead of me. I thought, ex-apprentice with Qantas, I thought that I'd have a lot going for me, but it turns out that there's no future for me. I'm like the other blokes down in Wollongong who sort of wonder where the whole government is going. Like, sort of, are we all going to end up on the dole?
What about you? Will you be stepping forward to voluntarily retrench yourself?
At 39 years age and 2 young children and a family and a mortgage? I don't think so. But I'm deeply concerned for the other members in our catering centre. There are a lot of staff over there, and we're worried about it, naturally. And we keep getting inquiries, I keep getting inquiries, well, what's the latest? Can you tell me? I say, I don't know. We're waiting for the package to be put forward to us, and then I'll let you know.
Admirable as the concept of voluntary retrenchment may be, we nonetheless consider that retrenchments of any sort are absolutely, well, not totally unacceptable, but they're very undesirable.
The mood of the workers is absolute disgust, not with Qantas. Qantas, to their credit, have done everything possible to stave off this evil day. But we're saying that our disgust is not only not with Qantas, as with the inadequacies of the federal government.
Our membership are horrified at the decisions that were handed out this week, and everybody has indicated that they now don't know where they stand. We are long-term employees with 20 years plus loyal service with the company, and we are really concerned about our jobs.
My fear is, and the fear, as I understand it around the workshop, is that this first 1,000 is merely the tip of the iceberg, and I would say people are terrified. Those people who are not in my age bracket are terrified of the continuity of their jobs and the fears that if they are thrown onto the labour market at this point in time, bearing in mind what is happening in general in the community, you know, it's horrifying.
The staff cut Qantas wants represents about 8% of the workforce. The airline's Deputy Chief Executive, Mr. Ron YATES, is genuine in his regret that 1,000 will have to go. He would far prefer the workers to choose who they'll be, rather than leave it up to him and his management colleagues.
A voluntary retrenchment program has been very successful in New Zealand and in England, and we felt that we would move that way first to at least protect those people that we have in the company and ensure that whatever is done with least pain.
What if you don't get 1,000 volunteers? What then?
Well, unless the international airline business suddenly leaps off again and That's most unlikely. I'm afraid there will have to be compulsory retrenchments, but that would be the last thing that we want to do.
If you do get the 1,000 voluntary retrenchments that you're looking for, can you guarantee that that would be the end of it, or might there be more in the future?
Well, if you could guarantee that the recession was not going to get any worse than it is, I would guarantee that. But I really can't guarantee anything, and I sincerely hope that the situation won't get any worse.
When the retrenchment package is announced by Qantas tomorrow, it may well be attractive to some. But if the mood of these men is any guide to shop floor feeling, there certainly won't be a rush of volunteers for the chop.
Unhappy days at Qantas. Paul Murphy reporting. Well, the Australian Taxation Office has announced investigations are pending about capital gains made by Robert Holmes à Court's Bell Group Limited. They include a $16 million profit he made from an attempted takeover bid of the Adelaide-based Elder Smith Goldsboro Mort Group in March last year. Elders appealed to the South Australian Government for help at the time, but they were told free market forces must prevail. By the time the Bell Group had gained nearly 20% of the 50% controlling shares they needed, a group of friends of Elders GM had rallied together on a share-buying spree, and the friends included the Advertiser Newspaper Limited. Well, Holmes à Court retreated, selling out for that $16 million profit. Questions about the identity of some of the friends and the manner of the whole confusing deal resulted in temporary suspension of trading for Elders on the stock exchange, and subsequently the South Australian Government ordered a Corporate Affairs Commission special investigation into the Elders takeover bid. Well, Robert Holmes à Court and his Bell Group failed in their takeover bid, but they were left with that $16 million, which has now attracted the attention of the Taxation Commissioner. Mr Holmes à Court is talking with David DeVos.
So you agree that the Taxation Office is investigating the prospect of assessing the Bell Group for a tax assessment of $10 million. Are you really as cool about that as you appear to be right now?
Yes, indeed.
Why? What reason have you for this coolness?
Well, it's a very simple business matter. The Bell Group earned, in 1979 and 1981, quite considerable capital profits. And we've got no doubt that those are capital profits and that they are not taxable.
Yet the Taxation Office obviously thinks otherwise. What would they have to prove that your Bell Group actually did in 1979 and in 1981 to have a case against you?
Well, for the Tax Commissioner to be successful, I think he would have to prove, as I understand it, that the Bell Group conducts a business of takeovers, and particularly a business of making profits out of unsuccessful takeovers.
Which you will say, obviously, that the Bell Group does not do.
Well, I'll say it and I'll prove it, and that is, in fact, the fact of the situation.
Yet in two cases, in 1979 and in 1981, the Bell Group made this profit of, $27 million on the capital gains. Now, do you think that was a right thing to have done?
No, what do you mean
by
right?
Let me ask you this question. A lot of people watching you, having followed those cases back in 79 and in 81, will see that the Bell Group has made this enormous amount of money, and they might think, what was the justification for that? What did the Bell Group do to actually earn that $27 million? Now, could you tell them that?
Yes, I could answer that. We did very little to actually earn that in that sense. Those were two of the most extraordinary commercial happenings in the last few years that I couldn't have foreseen, and I believe nobody could have foreseen that anybody would come out, particularly in the case of Elders, and purchase our shareholding at the price they did. Now, that was the situation. They did buy our shares. It was indeed not planned. It was not the way we wished to go.
Was it luck indeed?
Well, it was in one sense, in the sense that it was not predetermined and pre-planned. And indeed, my shareholders made a considerable amount of money. And if I had planned to do that, I would have been satisfied with far less.
If you said that not very much was done to actually earn that money, and it was almost, I guess, a windfall of $27 million to the Bell Group, why do you think, on moral grounds, that shouldn't be taxed? if we can widen the issue here.
Well, you are widening it.
Very much so, I appreciate
that. If you talk
that.
about moral grounds, and I suppose if you're talking not about the law as it stands, and you're talking about pure moral grounds,
which we are right now, yes,
and the moral basis for a capital gains tax, I would personally have no difficulty in seeing a capital gains tax imposed. I can see problems in administering it, but on moral grounds, I would see nothing wrong with profits like that being taxed.
Nothing wrong with it being taxed. So
nothing wrong with it being taxed.
If a capital gains tax were introduced, obviously you wouldn't like it to be retrospective, would you?
Well, I suppose I would think that retrospective legislation in this particular case is not relevant.
Well, I'm just wondering if the government might be tempted towards that field in view of their...
Well, I don't think so. I don't think it's the same. After the Elders transaction, legislation was brought in, which would have the effect of making that particular transaction, were it to happen again, taxable.
Assuming the Taxation Office does feel that it has a case to move against you, how far, sir, are you prepared to go to defend your $27 million?
Well, the first point I'd make is it's unfortunately not my $27 million.
Very loosely, we confuse you with the Bell Group, I know, but
yes,
fair enough.
It belongs to 10,000 shareholders that employ me. And yes, we'd appeal because we believe that it is not taxable.
With your knowledge, Mr. Holmes-a-Court, of the financial world, obviously a very intimate one, would there be many other people, many other businessmen in your situation who would now be in the Taxation Office's sights, so to speak, for similar reasons?
I don't really know, but I would imagine that if those transactions involving the Bell Group were found to be taxable, the net would cast wide and there'd be many other transactions.
And would haul in, I imagine, quite a protesting lot of people. Would that then cause another front of opposition to the government, do you think?
Well, I'm not protesting. I'm not protesting at all.
Not, sir, no.
I'm saying that if the High Court were to find that we were taxable, I'd be very happy to write out a cheque on the day and pay the tax. So I don't think there's...
But you're not going to hand over the money now. You don't feel you owe it now. You will do it if the High Court should find that you have to pay that 27.
Well, there is legislation in respect to that, and we'll do whatever we have to, whatever's agreed with the Commissioner. No, I don't think it's a question of protest, and we certainly wouldn't be protesting.
Mr. Holmes-a-Court, thank you very much.
Thank you.
David DeVos talking to a very cool and relaxed Robert Holmes-a-Court. The end result of the Bell Group's takeover bid was a decision by the South Australian Government to appoint John Von Duser, QC, to head the special investigation into the Elders' dealings. He called for the Managing Director of the Advertiser Group, Mr. Peter Owens, to explain which friends had helped the advertiser build up their share portfolio to 18%. Mr. Owens refused to give the information. The consequences of that action shocked the Adelaide business establishment. The full court of South Australia found Peter John Owens, top media chief in the state, guilty of contempt of court. On the 24th of August, he was imprisoned for an indefinite period in Adelaide jail. 6 weeks later, Owens applied for release, but still refused to provide the information. His application failed. So far, Peter Owens has spent 58 days in jail. An official in the Attorney-General's office told us today that the Von Duser report into the Elders takeover bid has not yet been presented to Mr. Griffin, but is expected soon. Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's program. We'll be back tomorrow night, and our political scientist Dean Jench will be along to explain how he feels the election campaign is running, so that should be worth watching. We look forward to your company then, so until then, from all of us here, good night.
The internationally acclaimed Adelaide production of Filthy Children returns to ABC television.
to be a girl? Why can't I be a boy?
Touch of your
Great big pimples all over my head.
Hey, Doc! Wipe that smile off your face, son.
Filthy Children on ABC Television, Saturday at 6.
Across Australia, this is ABC Colour with the 1982 Mazda Super Challenge.
Just feeling each other out a little bit. Hitting the ball much harder. Anybody falls short, the other player quick to take the initiative.
Quiet, please.
Geraldine to serve, 3-4, new balls. Perfect serve with new balls. Going away much quicker off the court.